In the summer of 1973, long after their marriage fell apart, Elvis Presley locked himself inside a tiny Memphis studio and wrote a song no one ever heard, until decades later. The lyrics weren't about fame or God or grief. They were about one woman, and one truth he could never say aloud. Once you hear the words he left behind, you'll never listen to Elvis the same way again. August 1973. Graceland stood quiet under the heavy Memphis heat. Outside, the air buzzed with cicadas. Inside, a lamp burned low in the jungle room. The king was awake while the world slept. The divorce from Priscilla was final. The papers lay in a drawer upstairs. But Elvis couldn't sleep. He kept seeing her face in every room of the house they'd once called home. Her laugh in the kitchen, her footsteps on the stairs. Even now, the silence sounded like her absence. He picked up his old Gibson guitar, the mahogany one she'd given him for his birthday years ago. The strings were slightly rusted. He didn't mind. He just wanted something that still felt real. Charlie Hodge sat in the corner, pretending to be busy tuning his own instrument. He knew better than to speak. When Elvis was in that kind of mood, you didn't interrupt. The clock on the mantel read 11:47 p.m. outside. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, Elvis strummed a few chords, slow, minor notes that hung in the air like rain. He paused, listened, then played again. This time, softer. Charlie glanced up. There was a tape recorder on the table, an old Revox model. Its red light blinked on. He had no idea if Elvis meant to record tonight or if it was just habit. Either way, the reel spun slowly as if it knew it was about to capture something it wasn't meant to hear. Elvis closed his eyes and began to hum. The melody was fragile, almost broken. Then came the words. You were my only home. Charlie's hands froze on his strings. He looked up, but Elvis kept going. I built my world around you and called it mine. Now the walls still stand, but you're gone from inside. His voice cracked halfway through. He stopped, sighed, then laughed softly to himself. Guess I'm not singing for Vegas tonight. Charlie tried to smile. He saw something different in his friend that night. Not the showman, not the king, but a man trying to make sense of his own heart. Elvis leaned back in the chair, fingers still on the strings. Rain started to drizzle outside, hitting the windows like a slow applause. He whispered, almost to himself, I don't write songs. Songs write me. Charlie didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Elvis picked up a pen and scribbled something on a sheet of yellow notepad. Ink smudged under his thumb. He tore the page off and folded it twice. Then he slipped it inside his Bible on the coffee table, right between Psalms 32 and 51. Forgiveness and mercy. He looked at Charlie and said, Don't let nobody see that, you hear? Charlie nodded. Promise. The king smiled faintly, tapping his finger on the guitar body like a heartbeat. I reckon she won't ever hear it, but maybe that's okay. Then he played again. A slower version, gentler, each note like an apology that never found its way out. For a moment, time stopped. The rain, the lamp, the creaking floorboards. All of it melted into that melody. Felt like the house itself was listening. Then Elvis stopped mid-chord. He set the guitar down and stared at the recorder. The red light blinked. He reached over and pressed stop. Silence. He didn't say a word for nearly a minute. Then quietly, he whispered, She was the only song I never finished. Charlie felt the hair stand up on his arms. Elvis looked out the window. Lightning flashed in the distance, bright enough to catch his reflection in the glass. A man haunted by his own music. He stood, took the notepad and Bible, and walked upstairs without another word. The door closed softly behind him. Charlie sat alone with the recorder and the quiet ring of the last note still hanging in the air. If you had been there that night, watching the king write his final love song to the woman he could never forget, would you have told her? Or would you have let the song stay hidden forever? Because what happened to that page next, no one was ready for. The morning sun crept through the curtains of Graceland, painting gold stripes across the living room floor. The storm was gone, but the house still felt heavy, as if the night before had left something behind. Charlie Hodge came downstairs, yawning, his guitar case in hand. He saw the old Bible sitting on the coffee table, still open, right where Elvis had left it. The yellow notepad was gone. At first, he didn't think much of it. Elvis always carried scraps of paper. Half lyrics, quick thoughts, prayers scribbled in the margins. But that page, something about it had felt different. When he peeked into the Bible, he found a folded paper wedged between the Psalms. The ink was faint, smudged by sweat or maybe tears. It read, "You were my only home. I walk these halls and still hear your laughter. If love was a place, I never left." Charlie froze. The handwriting was unmistakable. It wasn't a song. It was a confession. He glanced toward the staircase. He could hear Elvis's footsteps above, pacing, pacing, pacing. The sound of a man fighting something inside himself. Charlie folded the note again, careful not to tear it. He slid it back into the Bible where he found it. A few hours later, Elvis came down. He looked exhausted, eyes red, voice hoarse. But he smiled faintly when he saw Charlie. "Morning, E," Charlie said softly. Elvis nodded, rubbing his neck. "Didn't sleep much. Wrote something dumb last night." "Didn't sound dumb to me," Charlie said before he could stop himself. Elvis paused, studying him for a long moment. Then he grinned. "You were listening again, huh?" Charlie shrugged. "You left the tape on." Elvis chuckled, a deep, tired sound. "Well, maybe it's better if nobody ever hears it." He walked over to the Bible, brushed his fingers along the spine, and said quietly, "Some things are meant to stay between me and God." Then he looked at Charlie, his voice almost a whisper. "And maybe her." He picked up the Bible, tucked it under his arm, and headed for the stairs. Charlie wanted to ask, "Did you ever send her songs like that?" But he didn't, because in that house, unspoken things were louder than any words. Later that day, a maid named Nancy Rooks found Elvis's old blue pen on the piano bench, next to a torn envelope with Priscilla's name written in soft cursive. The letter inside was blank. Only the envelope remained, sealed with nothing but air. Nancy didn't ask questions. She placed it in the top drawer of the piano desk, where it stayed for years. That same night, Elvis canceled a recording session. He said he wasn't feeling well, but the truth was different. He spent hours sitting at the piano instead, running his fingers over the keys without playing a single note. If someone had walked in then, they might have seen him whisper something to himself. A small prayer maybe, or maybe a message for someone who'd stopped listening long ago. He wrote one last line on a scrap of hotel stationery before leaving the room. It said, "If she ever asks why I sang, tell her it was for her." That note vanished too. No one knows where it went. Decades later, fans still wonder how many love songs Elvis wrote that weren't meant for the radio. Songs not for fame but forgiveness. Because sometimes the things we never say are the ones that echo the loudest. What would you have done if you'd found that letter, hidden between the words of scripture and silence? Would you have shown it to her, or kept the secret like Charlie did? Either way, the truth inside those lyrics wasn't gone. It was waiting to be heard, and soon someone would hear it. Nashville, Tennessee, October 3, 1973. A fog hung over Music Row, the kind that blurs streetlights into halos. RCA Studio B stood quiet, its neon sign flickering against the damp glass doors. Inside, the smell of coffee, cigarettes, and tape reels filled the air. Just after midnight, the door creaked open. Elvis Presley walked in wearing a black jacket, dark glasses, and the weight of someone who hadn't slept in days. The receptionist looked up, startled. He wasn't scheduled tonight. Behind him came Charlie Hodge, carrying a guitar case and a paper bag from Graceland's kitchen, 2 peanut butter sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. Elvis nodded to the sound engineer on duty, a quiet man named Marty Latham. "Mind if I borrow the room a while?" Marty hesitated only a second. "Of course, Mr. Presley." Elvis walked straight to the vocal booth. He didn't look like a superstar. He looked like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. The red light blinked on. He set the microphone lower, picked up his Gibson, and strummed the first slow chord. His voice came out raw, almost trembling. "If love was a house, I left the door open." Charlie froze. The words matched the note he'd seen inside the Bible weeks before. "I built my walls out of promises and prayer, but the wind still whispers your name through the air." He stopped, took a breath, closed his eyes, then began again, lower this time, as if he were singing into memory itself. Marty sat behind the console, his hand hovering over the fader. Every instinct told him to perfect the sound, to fix levels, polish edges. But something in the way Elvis's voice cracked made him leave it untouched. Between verses, Elvis spoke softly, almost to himself. "Don't erase this, all right? Not yet." He sang the final chorus, voice barely above a whisper. "If you ever hear this, forgive me. I tried to love you right. I just ran out of time." When the last note faded, the room stayed silent for nearly 30 seconds. The reel spun on, capturing nothing but the hum of the air conditioner and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Then Elvis whispered, "For C." Charlie glanced at Marty. Neither man moved. Elvis leaned back, shoulders trembling. "Don't play that for anyone. Not while I'm breathing." Marty nodded slowly. "Understood." Elvis smiled, sad, but lighter somehow. "Erase it after I'm gone," he said. He left the booth, patted Charlie on the back, and walked out into the night. The door shut behind him with a soft click. No aplausos, no entourage, just rain on the pavement. Marty sat there, staring at the tape reel spinning to its end. He reached for the erase switch and stopped. Something deep inside told him he couldn't do it. Not to this. Instead, he rewound the tape, labeled the box in neat handwriting, "Private, EP 1973 for C." Then he sealed it with masking tape and locked it in a drawer. For weeks afterward, Marty couldn't stop thinking about that night. He'd engineered hundreds of sessions, hits, rehearsals, soundtracks, but nothing had ever felt like that. It wasn't a performance. It was a goodbye. One evening, he asked Charlie, was it really for her? Charlie hesitated. Who else could it be for? They never spoke of it again. Years later, when reporters asked about Elvis's unreleased recordings, Charlie always shook his head. Some songs weren't meant for charts, he'd say. They were meant for peace. And maybe that's what this one was. A peace offering written in melody. Marty eventually left RCA. He kept the tape locked away, moving it from one safe deposit box to another every time he changed cities. He never played it again, afraid the fragile ribbon would snap. But he wrote one line on the tape's case before sealing it forever. He said, "Erase it." I couldn't. Decades later, that single act of disobedience would bring the world to tears. Because when the box was finally found, the real inside wasn't just another recording. It was the sound of a man forgiving himself. And what that tape revealed would change how people remembered Elvis Presley forever. 1977. The summer heat in Memphis was thick enough to feel like memory itself. The world woke to the headline that shattered millions of hearts. Elvis Presley, dead at 42. Crowds flooded the gates of Graceland, pressing flowers, scarves, and handwritten notes through the iron bars. Somewhere across the city, Marty Latham sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the small metal box that held the reel labeled Private, EP 1973 for C. He couldn't bring himself to open it. Not yet. For months, the tape stayed locked in his desk drawer. Sometimes he'd think about destroying it, doing what the king had asked. But then he'd hear that voice again in his head, whispering those last words. Don't erase this, all right? He didn't. He couldn't. Years passed. The world moved on. Priscilla raised Lisa Marie. Graceland became a museum, and Elvis turned from man into myth. Every August 16th, candlelight vigils wrapped the mansion in silence. Fans held each other and sang Love Me Tender under the Memphis stars. But one sound was still missing. In 1989, Marty retired and moved to Nashville. He packed his belongings into cardboard boxes, taping them shut with shaky hands. The reel went into the last box, marked simply Studio B Memories. For nearly a decade, it slept again. Sometimes, When thunder rattled his windows, Marty swore he could hear the faint hum of the tape spinning inside its case, like it was alive. By 1998, technology had changed. Studios used digital boards and clean edits. No hiss, no warmth, none of the imperfection that made old records breathe. Marty missed that. He missed the moments when the music felt human. One evening, while cleaning out his garage, he opened a dusty trunk and saw the familiar tape box. His heart skipped. The handwriting had faded, but one word was still clear: foresee. He carried it inside, set it beside his turntable, and just stared. Should he play it, or leave it buried in silence like Elvis intended? His wife, Linda, walked in and asked what he was holding. He smiled faintly. Something I was told to forget. She tilted her head. Then why keep it? Marty didn't answer. He pressed his thumb along the edge of the reel and whispered, because it's the most honest thing he ever said. That night, he wrote a letter, not to RCA, not to the press, but to history itself. It read, "If anyone ever finds this, handle it with reverence. It's not a song. It's a soul recorded on tape." Then he sealed the reel in a new envelope and placed it inside a fireproof safe. For the next 4 years, it remained untouched. Until 2002, when a young sound archivist cataloging RCA's forgotten materials found a sealed box marked EP Private Sessions. Inside were several reels, but one stood out, smaller, older, labeled in Marty's neat handwriting. The archivist, unaware of what he discovered, logged it as Untitled Ballad, Private Use, and moved it to the company's restoration queue. No one realized they were holding a piece of music history, a message that had waited nearly 3 decades to be heard. The next time the tape would play, the world would finally hear the song Elvis wrote not for fame, but for forgiveness. What would you have done if you'd found it first? Would you have honored the silence, or let his voice speak one more time? Because once the reel began to turn again, there would be no stopping what it revealed. Summer 2002, Nashville, Tennessee. In a small RCA restoration room that smelled of coffee, dust, and magnetic tape, a young technician named Evan McCready powered up an aging reel-to-reel player. Fluorescent light hummed above him. On the table sat a plain cardboard box stamped EP Private Sessions. Inside, one fragile reel. The label read, "Private, EP 1973 for C." Evan didn't know what for C meant. He assumed it was a code, maybe an engineer's note. Still, something about the handwriting made him pause. He slipped on his headphones and pressed play. Static. Then a hum. A single guitar chord bloomed through the hiss, raw and intimate, like the sound of someone sitting inches away. Then came the voice. "If love was a house, I left the door open." Evan's eyes widened. That voice. He'd heard it his whole life on old records and documentaries, but never like this. It wasn't polished. It wasn't performing. It was bleeding. He turned to his supervisor, whispering, "You need to hear this." They listened together as the tape played on. "I built my walls out of promises and prayer, but the wind still whispers your name through the air." Every syllable carried exhaustion, regret, and tenderness. By the second verse, both men were silent. Then came the line that made the hair on Evan's neck stand up. "If you ever hear this, forgive me. I tried to love you right. I just ran out of time." For a moment, there was nothing but the soft spin of the reel. And then, faintly, Elvis's voice again. Barely a whisper. "For C." Evan muted the machine, hands trembling. "It's her," he said. "It has to be Priscilla." They transferred the audio to a clean master and stored the reel back inside its box. No press release. No headlines. Just quiet awe. Word spread slowly through RCA's inner circle. A private listening session was arranged at Graceland for verification. Only 5 people were invited. Among them, Priscilla Presley. Late that evening, in a candlelit side room overlooking the meditation garden, the speakers began to hum. The recording filled the space, cracked yet pure. As the first verse played, Priscilla sat very still. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. When he sang, "You were my only home," she closed her eyes. Those words had once been spoken to her decades ago, on a different night, in a different house. By the time the song ended, No one in the room spoke. The air felt thick, holy almost. Priscilla whispered only one sentence. He finally said goodbye. She asked that the track never be commercially released. It was a message between two souls, not a single for the charts. The executives agreed. But someone inside RCA made a copy for the archives. And over time, small snippets leaked. A bootleg here, a grainy radio play there. Each time, listeners reacted the same way. Silence, then tears. Music critics later called it Elvis's last love letter. Fans simply called it the song. Priscilla never publicly commented again. But years later, a friend of hers revealed that she kept a cassette copy locked inside a blue jewelry box at home. When asked why, the friend said Priscilla had replied, "Because it's where his heart finally told the truth." That cassette was never found. But the song's lyrics survived in one place, in a typed transcript from the restoration team's notes. At the bottom of the page, someone had typed in small letters, "Recorded October 3rd, 1973, RCA Studio B, duration 3:57. What the public heard of Elvis was the legend, the glitter, the king. What that tape revealed was the man still trying to apologize for breaking someone he loved. It wasn't just a song. It was a confession, and it was about to rewrite his legacy forever. The song never reached radio, but somehow, it found its way into people's hearts, like a secret whispered from one believer to another. In 2004, a museum exhibit opened in downtown Memphis titled Elvis Unheard: The Lost Years. Most visitors came expecting old photos and jumpsuits. But at the far end of the hall, under soft gold light, stood a single glass display. Inside was a faded sheet of paper, blue ink, torn edges. At the top, in Elvis's handwriting, were the words, "Foresee." Below it, a single lyric line, "You were my only home." The small brass plaque read, "Composed August 1973. Dedicated privately to Priscilla Presley." People stood there for minutes, just staring. Some cried. Some whispered prayers. Others wrote notes and slipped them into the cracks of the display, as if leaving messages for the king himself. One older woman from Germany told a reporter, "He wasn't singing to us. He was singing for her." And somehow, that makes it even more beautiful. Charlie Hodge, gray-haired and slower now, attended the exhibit quietly one morning before it opened. He stood in front of the case for nearly an hour. When a young curator approached, he said softly, "He wrote that after the storm. He wanted her to know he still believed in love." The curator asked, "Do you think she ever forgave him?" Charlie smiled sadly. "I think she already had." He reached into his pocket and placed something on the base of the display, a small cassette tape with no label. When asked later what it was, he only said, "It's my copy. It belongs with him now." That tape was never cataloged publicly. But those who were there said that when the museum lights flickered later that night, the speakers overhead glitched, and a soft hum of "If Love Was a House" floated through the empty halls for a few seconds before fading away. Coincidence? Maybe. But it left everyone who heard it in tears. By 2010, the myth of the secret song had spread far beyond Memphis. Bootleg collectors traded fragments. Radio hosts spoke of it in hushed tones. Fan clubs posted the lyrics online, arguing about whether Elvis had written more verses that never made it onto the tape. Some said the melody healed something in them. Others said it broke them open. It became more than a lost track. It became a lesson. Elvis had sung countless songs about heartbreak. But this one was different. It wasn't written for applause or gold records. It was written out of humility, out of the need to set a soul right before it was too late. A writer from Rolling Stone later called it the quietest revolution in music, proof that vulnerability is more powerful than fame. Even Priscilla, years later, was asked in a rare interview if the story was true. She smiled softly and said, "Some songs are best left between two hearts." That was all she said. And it was enough. To this day, people still leave small cassette tapes, handwritten lyrics, and flowers at the gates of Graceland every August 16th. Some play the rumored demo through tiny speakers, letting his fragile voice drift into the night air. When the song fades, the crowd always does the same thing, they stand in silence. Because even after all these years, they can still feel it. That longing, that honesty, that quiet apology woven in melody. And somehow it makes them believe that love, like music, never really ends. Decades later, the story of Priscilla still lingers like smoke after a candle goes out. The melody never hit the charts. It never won awards. But maybe that's what made it timeless. Because the truth hidden in that song was never meant for the world. It was meant for the woman who once called him home. When people talk about Elvis Presley, they remember the lights, the jumpsuits, the crowds that roared his name. But in that 3-minute recording, there were no lights, no crowd, just a man and his guitar, whispering an apology through trembling strings. And maybe that's where his real legacy lives. Not in the fame, but in the fragility. Every person who's ever loved and lost can hear themselves in that song. The regret, the tenderness, the hope that maybe, somewhere, the person you hurt still remembers you with a little grace. That's why people still stand outside Graceland each August, listening to the silence between the notes. They're not just mourning a legend. They're remembering their own first love, their own mistakes, their own unfinished songs. The secret track taught the world something no concert ever could. That even the strongest voices break. That even kings have hearts that ache for forgiveness. And that saying, "I'm sorry," doesn't always need words. It can live inside a melody that refuses to die. If Elvis had released the song, it might have become another hit. But by keeping it hidden, it became something greater, a message about humanity. He didn't need the world to hear it. He just needed her to know. And maybe that's what love truly is. The courage to keep feeling, even when no one's watching. A quote carved into a small plaque outside the Memphis Museum says it best. In the end, he sang not to be remembered, but to be forgiven. That's the echo he left behind. A reminder that fame fades, but honesty doesn't. When you listen to his old records now, between the notes you can almost hear it, that ghost of a song written in the quiet hours of 1973. You can almost hear him saying, "If love was a house, I left the door open." And maybe, just maybe, that door never closed. Because every time someone plays his music, every time a fan hums along, every time a stranger forgives a memory that still hurts, that song lives again. The king may have left the building, but his heart stayed behind. If the story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in love that never fades. Were you alive when Elvis's voice first filled the airwaves? Or did his songs find you later? Tell us your memory below, and keep his story alive by remembering that even legends whisper their truth in the quiet.